All right, let's talk about the Black Crowes. For about 40 years now, this is a band that has been the living, breathing definition of raw, soulful, honest-to-God rock and roll.
And if you want to understand the band, you have to start right here, the relationship between brothers Chris and Rich Robinson. I mean, this quote from Chris just says it all, doesn't it? It's a bond that's as brilliant as it is volatile, and it's the engine that powers this entire story.
So to really get the Black Crowes, you gotta understand the two guys at the center of the hurricane.
And talk about night and day. On one hand, you had Chris, the frontman. He was the mouthpiece, the charismatic leader who was never, ever afraid to speak his mind. Then you had Rich, the guitarist, the guy writing all the music. He was the total opposite, shy and crushingly sensitive. They were like two halves of a whole, but man, those halves were constantly at war with each other.
So where did this all come from? Well, they grew up in Marietta, Georgia, and their house was just soaked in music. Their dad, Stan, was a professional folk musician, so they were hearing everything. Crosby, Stills and Nash, Sly and the Family Stone, you name it. But then the brothers brought their own thing to the table. They were into punk rock. And that blend of old-school soul and punk attitude, that's the secret sauce right there. That's the Black Crowes sound.
And when they finally hit the scene, it was like a lightning strike. You got to remember what music sounded like back then. It was all hair metal, grunge was just starting to bubble up, and then these guys show up, looking and sounding like they just stepped out of 1972. It was completely different.
And things happened fast. I mean, incredibly fast. They start out in '84 as this little band called Mr. Crow's Garden. By 1989, they're signed by the legendary Rick Rubin. And then, just 2 years after that, bam, Rolling Stone magazine names them the best new American band. That's not a climb to the top, that's a rocket ship.
And what launched that rocket? This. Their debut album from 1990, Shake Your Moneymaker. It was an absolute monster, selling more than 5 million copies. It took them from playing bars in Georgia to being global rock stars, pretty much overnight.
And you know why? That album was just wall-to-wall classics. I mean, their killer cover of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle, the sheer power of Twice as Hard, that beautiful, heartbreaking ballad, She Talks to Angels, the swagger of Jealous Again. These weren't just songs. They became the soundtrack for the early 90s.
Okay, so they're on top of the world. Their second album is about to make them even bigger. But here's the thing about the Black Crowes. With more success came more trouble. They were just not going to play the corporate game.
And musically, they were on fire. That follow-up album, The Southern Harmony and Musical Companion, was a masterpiece. It went straight to #1 on the Billboard charts. Critics were falling all over themselves to praise it. This proved without a doubt that they were the real deal, not some flash in the pan.
But that defiance streak, it was no joke. Get this, in 1991, they're opening for ZZ Top, and Chris gets on stage every night and starts ripping into the tour's sponsor, Miller Lite Beer. He's telling audiences they don't do commercials for a product. Well, you can probably guess what happened next. Yep, they got kicked right off the tour.
And that was just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the controversies just followed them. There were arrests, and who could forget the album cover for Amorica in '94, the one that got banned from major stores? Yeah, these guys were not trying to make friends with the establishment. Not at all.
But, and there's always a but with this band, that same fiery, rebellious energy that made their music so great, it was also the thing that was destined to burn it all down from the inside.
The mid-90s got pretty dark. Musically, they were making these really interesting experimental albums like Amorica and Three Snakes in One Charm. But behind the scenes, it was a total mess. We're talking heavy drug use, massive egos, and that brotherly rivalry boiling over into something really toxic.
And you can just feel that strain. The band's lineup became a revolving door, and the gap between Chris and Rich just got wider and wider. Chris said it himself, "This band, it's broken my heart." By 2002, they just couldn't do it anymore. They were completely burned out and went on their first hiatus. They got back together in 2005, but nothing had really changed. As Rich himself put it, the same bullshit was still there. They never fixed the root problems. It all imploded again in 2013, this time in a really ugly way over money, which Chris later admitted was just his excuse to blow the whole thing up for good.
And the fallout from that breakup was just total silence. For 6 years. Can you imagine? 6 long years, these two brothers who had built this incredible thing together didn't say a single word to each other. Their kids didn't know their cousins. I mean, that was it.
It really truly seemed like the story of the Black Crowes was over. But this is the Black Crowes we're talking about. The story is never that simple, because that musical connection, that spark that started in their parents' basement all those years ago, turns out it was just too strong to die.
After all that silence, they finally started talking again. Maybe they just needed that time apart. And in 2020, they did what everyone thought was impossible. They reunited. And what better way to do it than a massive tour celebrating 30 years of the album that started it all? Shake Your Moneymaker.
You know, we can't talk about their legacy without talking about their sound. And a huge piece of that puzzle is Rich Robinson's legendary guitar collection. Seriously, the guy has an arsenal of vintage Telecasters, Les Pauls, you name it. It's a key ingredient in their whole rock and roll stew.
So, after all this, what's the big takeaway? What's the lesson from this 40-year roller coaster? I think it's that sometimes the greatest art, the most soulful music, it doesn't come from a peaceful place. It's born from conflict, from chaos, from madness, and from two brothers who couldn't live with each other, but couldn't create without each other either.
Which leaves us with this one big question, right? Their relationship has given us some of the best rock music of the last few decades, but it's also caused immense pain over and over again. So what is it? A creative force or a cycle of self-destruction? Maybe the real answer is that it has to be both. And that right there is the ongoing, incredible story of the Black Crowes.